Hey there, this is Anthony from mycodeteacher.com, and in this lesson I'm going to show you how to make an application with a countdown timer in it. So we're going to have a large countdown timer in the middle, and underneath is going to be a start/stop and a reset button. So let's get started. So I've got Xcode open here. Of course, we're going to make a new project. Choose window based, and we will title it timer. So the first thing we want to do is we want to create our user interface. So of course we know that in mainwindow.zib is the default UI window that shows up on screen when the application first launches. So we're going to open that. Let's drag this to another space here to keep things organized and avoid clutter. Okay, so again, first we want a large label in the center of the screen to actually be the timer. So we are going to align this and then going to change the font here, make it a bit larger. Go with 64. We're going to have the text center. It's actually, let's move this up a little bit. Center it again. Now we'll just put here 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Now we need the start/stop and reset buttons. So we're going to use from the library UI button here. A UI button is a relatively simple object. It simply sends a message to an object that you tell it to when it's touched or when any of these events occur. So you can decide which one of these events you want to make it trigger after it happens, the message call to the object it's connected to. So you can see there's actually a large variety. Basically any event that you can think of that would occur for a button exists here. So for example, touch down as soon as the button is pressed. Touch up inside, so if the button is pressed and then released from within the button. Touch up outside if it's pressed and released from outside the button. We're going to go with touch up inside. So let's give us a title here, start by default. Of course it will switch to stop when the timer is running. Another button, we'll call this one reset. So let's center these two here. And now what we need to do is we need to go back to Xcode and add some outlets and actions for our timer app delegate class so that we can make some connections in Interface Builder. So let's go back to Xcode, go to timer app delegate.h, and first what we'll do is we will create the outlet for the label. So IV outlet, UI label, timer label. And so save this here, go back to Interface Builder. Now let's connect from the app delegate to the timer label. So now of course we're doing this so that we have access from code to this label on screen here so that we can change what it says. So when the timer begins, we can count down or have this label change every second. So let's save that, go back to Xcode again, and now we're going to add the actions for the two buttons to call to. IV action start or stop timer and IV action reset timer. Save this and now go back to Interface Builder and connect the start button to timer app delegate. You can see here that touch up inside is default. So when you right click and drag from a button to an object and connect it to some action, by default Interface Builder assumes you want that action to be called to when someone releases the button from within it. So we don't actually have to connect from here. We can just right click on the button and drag to the object we want it to send a message to. Reset timer. So now both of our buttons here are connected to the appropriate actions, and let's save this and now get some code going. So there's an object Apple has written for developers called an NSTimer object, and an NSTimer object, when initialized, will send a message to some object that you tell it to every however many seconds you tell it to send it in. So we plug in an interval and we tell it if we want it to repeat, and so every every time that interval passes, that number of seconds passes, it will fire or send a message to the object that it's told to send a message to. So again, we're going to use an NSTimer object to actually do the countdown. So what we need to do here is we're going to add another instance variable to store that timer, NSTimer. Timer, we'll call it. Now let's save this. Now let's go to the .m file, and first what we're going to do is we're going to make it so that the timer label in Interface Builder says 300 by default, so 300 seconds. We're going to do a by the second countdown timer. So timer label text equals 300. So now when the application first launches, as you can see, we've done this in the application did finish launching method, the timer label will automatically read 300. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start or stop timer method here. But first what we need to do is we need some way of knowing if the timer is currently running. So we could set the timer to nil when it stops and create it when it's going, but just to be on the safe side, we're just actually going to create another instance variable, timer is running, and we will reference that so we know if the timer is running or not. So let's save this, and so we'll just change that when the timer stops. We'll change it. So if timer is running, so right now what we're going to do here, we're going to say that the timer is running. So if timer is running, we're going to call to a method here, timer invalidate. And what that does is it tells the timer, the NSTimer, to stop, to remove itself from the run loop so that it no longer fires an action or sends a message every however many seconds it's told to do so. So basically, it just takes itself out of the application and stops doing whatever it was doing. So we invalidate it, and now the timer will stop. Else, so now we're here in this part of the if statement. The timer is not running. We need to get it running. So timer equals. Now we need to create a timer. So let's go to the documentation here and look up NSTimer. So under creating a timer here, there's different ways you can make a new NSTimer object. We're going to go with scheduled timer with time interval, target selector, user info, repeats. So the first parameter is however many seconds you want it to fire after, and then if it repeats every that many seconds, it fires again, or sends a message to an object that every time those seconds elapse. The second parameter here is the target, so that's going to be the object you want it to send a message to every however many seconds. Selector is going to be the message you want it to send to that object. User info is basically parameters to be plugged into that method. We're not going to deal with that here. We're going to pass in nil. And then repeats, of course, is if you want it to repeatedly send that message to the specified object. If you plug in no, it'll send it once after the time has elapsed here. If you say yes, it'll continue to fire that message every time this time has elapsed, these seconds have elapsed. So let's close the documentation here. So NSTimer, scheduled timer with time interval, obviously 1 second, so there's going to be a second timer. Now this here, we don't want invocation, so we're going to delete this here. Target self, so we're just going to have it send a message to the timer app delegate. Selector, so here we plug in the @selector here. Whatever you put in the parentheses is just basically a method call, so the name or the header of the method. We haven't created a method to actually subtract a second from the label, but we will, and when we do, we'll call it count down 1 second. So we're going to have to make a method called count down 1 second that subtracts a second from the timer. Next, user info nil and repeats yes. And now we retain it so that it's not released from the from memory or deallocated from memory at the end of this method. And now we can close this. And now one thing we need to do is timer is running equals not timer is running, or the opposite of what it currently is. So with this statement, if the timer is running is yes, then we change it to no. If it's no, we change it to yes. Okay, so so far we've made it so that the timer will get going or will stop depending on what's currently happening. But what we need to do is we need to change the title of the start/stop button. So if the timer is running, we want the title to say stop. If it's stopped, we want it to say start. So we need some way of accessing the start/stop button so we can change the title when the conditions change. So we need an IB outlet here. So IB outlet UI button start or stop button. Save this, and now let's go to Interface Builder and connect that outlet to the start button here. Now we can change the title when the timer stops or starts. So we're going to use a method here. Set title. So if the timer is running, we are going to stop it and we want to make the title start. For control state, for state, UI control state normal. So there's a bunch of control states here. Another is highlighted, another is selected. So basically when the button is in different states, you can have it read different titles. With UI control state normal, we're basically saying the default title is start. And now we're going to do the same thing here, but instead of changing the title to start, we're going to change it to stop. So start or stop button set title stop for state UI control state normal. Okay, so now the timer will stop or start, and the button's title will change from start to stop or stop to start. So now the start or stop timer method is complete. Now we need to do the reset timer method. Void reset timer. So when the timer resets, first we're going to invalidate the timer so the countdown stops. Then we're going to change the title of the button to start. So start or stop button set title start, and for state UI control state normal. And then we are going to set the timer labels text equal to 300. So we're setting it back to the original. Now that method is complete. Now we need to implement the countdown 1 second method. So every second that's going to be called to, and its job is to subtract a second from the current time. Count down 1 second. So first we need to figure out what time we're at. Of course, the timer label stores an NS string for its text, and we need an integer so we can subtract from it. So int current time equals timer label text int value. So there's a method you can call to NS string instances, and int value that returns the integer value of the current string. So if the current string happens to be storing an integer, it will return that. So now int new time equals current time minus 1. So this is going to be the new time on the timer label, so we're subtracting 1 second from it. And now we're going to give that back to the timer label. Text, timer label text equals NS string with format we're using here, %d new time. So now this method here, string with format, an NS string method, you can basically use C printf style formatting to plug in variables in place of these tokens here. So of course %d is going to be replaced by this integer here. So we're letting the string know that this %d is an integer, or it's going to expect an integer, and then that'll be replaced by whatever comes after the comma here. If you wanted to add another integer, %d again, so again these tokens here will be replaced by what's after the commas, you can add another one here, current time. So you can add as many tokens as you want, and then they'll be replaced in order, in respective order, by what comes in the sequential commas. So now let's save this, and now we can build our application, and everything should work. So if we press start here, see every second the number in the timer label goes down by 1. You can press stop, the timer is invalidated and it stops counting down. We can press start again and it should pick up where it left off. And of course we can press reset, and the timer is stopped, reset, and the title of this button here is changed. So basically, to recap, the start button when pressed is set up to call to the start or stop timer method. And so first we check to see if the timer is currently running. If it's running, which means the countdown is going, we stop the countdown by invalidating or stopping the timer. And then we make sure we set the title of the start or stop button to start, so that it makes basically logical sense here for the user. Otherwise, if the timer is currently stopped, then we create a timer and we tell it to call every 1 second. We tell it to call to the countdown 1 second method here. We tell it to repeat, and of course the timer here every 1 second, scheduled timer with time interval 1. And then we set the title of the start or stop button to stop, and then we basically alter or make the timer is running value the opposite of what it is. So if it's yes, it becomes no. If it's no, it becomes yes. Then the reset timer method, which the reset button calls to, stops the timer, changes the title to start of the start button here, and then sets the timer back to 300 seconds, or 300. And then of course the countdown 1 second method gets the time as an integer from the current from the timer label's current text, subtracts 1, and then plugs it back in. That wraps up our lesson on timers, on a timer application. I'm Anthony from MyCodeTeacher.com. I hope you learned a lot, and I hope you tune into future lessons. Thanks for watching.